Hi everyone. This video is not something I usually do, which is more of an informative video without any sort of actual keyboarding, soldering, desoldering, or sound tests. But I believe it's the most important video that I've ever made. And instead of waving my hands around for the camcorder this entire video, you'll just get this first part of the video with hand waving. I'll include videos of me soldering and desoldering and just typing randomly from other videos while you listen to this voiceover with the occasional images that pop up. Anyways, the topic for today's video is how to be financially smart with purchases in our keyboard hobby, and also balance smart spending with enjoying the hobby. This doesn't mean that you can't recoup your purchases by selling them back on the aftermarket like Mech Market or so on. This means that you should be responsible with your purchases so you never put yourself in a situation where you feel like you may be making a purchasing mistake, or at least lessen the chances of making said mistake, or lowering the amount of times that you've made that mistake. Before we start, I want to make it perfectly clear that I am not perfect. I have given to FOMO, I've bought way too many keyboards, keycaps, and switches, and even though I've had decades of experience with various hobbies at various different price points, having good buying habits is still an active part of my purchasing strategy, and something that I have to work on. Just like other skills, you have to practice it in order to get good at it. At least, that's for me. I had to experience a few mistakes myself in order to really understand how to correctly implement sensible spending into my own purchasing decisions. And don't take this video as me saying that I'm better than you or that I've never made any mistakes. All I want to do is share my own personal opinions and, more importantly, experiences to hopefully help others. It can be difficult to say no to buying stuff in our hobby, and I'm not asking all of you to be perfect, since none of us are. Especially not me. All I'm asking is to pause before making your next keyboard, keycap, switch, or hobby-related purchase. Let me be blunt. It's not worth it. It's not worth it to not have a budget and just buy things. It's not worth it to fall into that trap of buying stuff only to realize that you could have done something much better with that money, even if it doesn't benefit you in the short term, or if you don't necessarily need that money right now. It's not worth it to develop poor financial habits. Also, I use the term bankrupt loosely here, and I hope that you don't actually file for bankruptcy due to spending too much on the hobby. Everyone's circumstances are different. Will you never be able to recover from being addicted to buying things? Of course not. Can you ignore the things that I'm going to tell you and be fine? Oh, sure, absolutely. There's always an exception. My grandmother smoked and drank daily and didn't participate in any sort of routine physical activity after her 40s and still lived to be 96. And she passed away peacefully without any sort of disease or ailment. But just because someone can live to be almost 100 without any sort of physical activity doesn't mean that you shouldn't get in some exercise. Just because someone never goes to the dentist or never goes to their doctor checkups every year doesn't mean that you should ignore your health. And just because someone can spend their entire paycheck time and time again on keyboard-related purchases and have very few consequences doesn't mean that you should. If you have the finances to buy every single thing you want in the hobby, and you end up having zero issues with doing so, hey, kudos to you. Similarly, on the other end, if you have no income, but don't have to pay for rent, utilities, or food, and you're able to spend your money when you immediately get it on keep stuff without any repercussions, hey, that's your decision. This video is not geared towards those outliers, those that are able to afford anything and everything and still be in a good financial situation, or those that don't have any income and don't have to pay for any sort of living expense, but end up buying stuff without any negative consequences. This video is for those of you, me included, that are in the middle. If you fall into those two categories, you still may get something useful out of this video, but I'm talking to the majority that are not rich and are not in a situation where they have little or no income and little or no savings. Someone that is able to afford making key-related purchases and understand that this hobby is a luxury and a want, not a need. If you got into the hobby due to ergonomics and only buy ergo boards, then I can see how it could be closer to a need. In general, however, for those that aren't using tented splits or that purchase so many boards or key-related items that the possible needs spill over to a want, it's hard to argue that this hobby isn't a luxury hobby. Now, personally, I was born and raised in a very poor environment, where my parents instilled in me the value of saving money, even when I didn't have a job or a reliable source of income. When the time came that I started working, I was super grateful for what my parents taught me, and I know how difficult it is when you don't have money. It taught me never to waste it and to be frugal when it comes to money. I'm not a shrink, I'm not your dad, and I'm certainly not a financial advisor, but I'm hoping that by giving these 3 tips and sharing my own experiences, you will at least think twice about giving into that dopamine rush of buying something, or make you realize that you've gone overboard with your keyboard purchases. Without further ado, let's talk about tip number 1. Tip number 1. Figure out your budget and budgeting tips. Am I saying that you shouldn't spend your money on luxury items like keyboards, keycaps, or everything else in our hobby? Of course not. What are hobbies but ways for us to have fun or have an outlet to de-stress from our jobs or our lives? For example, I'm a huge gamer and have been ever since I was old enough to get neck pain from playing video games at Walmarts that had the demo game setups. What I'm talking about when I say figure out your budget is being able to differentiate between impulse buying or spending beyond your means and making wise purchasing decisions. There's always a balance that you should strive for. What I want to introduce to you all today is knowing your budget when it comes to keyboard spending, and once you set your budget, how not to exceed it. There are many different methods of budgeting. Some adhere to the 50-30-20 rule, where they use 50% of their income on needs, 20% straight into savings, and 30% into wants. But that's not always viable. Depending on your unique situations, 50% may not be enough for needs, and you may end up spending something like 70 or 80% of your income on your needs. Another method is just taking 20% of your income each month and putting it into savings, and the rest can be used however you'd like. More into savings, spending it all, or anything in between. However, that could result in someone spending too loosely and throwing caution to the winds. A third method is simply talking with a financial advisor and or creating a custom budget for your own specific needs. Figure out your expenses and your needs, and then go from there. Are any of these better than another? Well, no. We each have different circumstances, and what works for one may not work for another. The important thing that all 3 of these methods, as well as other methods, share is the fact that there is some sort of tracking when it comes to expenses. Now, keep that in the back of your mind as we move on to 3 scenarios that will help me illustrate a few points. Scenario 1, the well-off individual. Please note that a lot has changed, and what seemed to be enough 20 or 30 years ago might not be enough nowadays. I'm just saying well-off so we can refer to scenario 1 without having to explain everything again. Let's say scenario 1, the well-off individual, is someone who has about $1 million in savings, retirement accounts, and so on. They make $150,000 a year from their job, which is roughly $12,500 a month. They also have, after their living expenses like housing and food and so on, and after taxes, deductions, what have you, around $3,000 a month to spend however they wish, be it put into savings or spending it all or anything in between. Now, let's look at that $3,000. Again, this is after all their needs are taken into account. You could do a lot with that $3,000. You could put more into savings, you could spend it all, anything in between. I think we can all agree, however, that spending all of that money on keyboard-specific items is not being financially smart. Spending $3,000 a month, which is $36,000 a year on keyboards, that's quite a number. Even spending half of that ends up being $18,000 a year spent on keyboards, with $1,500 a month to use on whatever want that they have. But that's still a lot of money to spend on keyboards. Now, let's keep that scenario in the back of our minds as we move on to the next one. Scenario 2, the teenager or young adult. Again, this person may not be an actual teenager or young adult, but when thinking of someone that doesn't either have regular income or that doesn't have to worry about living expenses and has the majority of their needs taken care of, teenagers like my son and young adults come to mind. This is an individual who, let's say, has $500 in savings, and they don't have regular income. Let's just say $50 a month. They have zero living expenses, so that $50 a month can be spent however they wish, be it all into savings or spending it all or anything in between. Just like previously, the individual can spend all of that $50, save all of that, or anything between. Common sense would say that they should be very careful on how they spend that money, because not only do they not have reliable regular income, whatever income they may get each month is far less than the well-off scenario 1 individual and the eventual scenario 3 individual that we'll talk about. Does this mean that they can't enjoy the hobby? Absolutely not. It just means that they should be more careful on how that money is spent and ideally work towards becoming a scenario 1 or 3 individual. That brings us to scenario 3. The average Joe. Someone that isn't necessarily well off, but someone that has some savings and a reliable source of income. An individual that has, let's say, $200,000 in savings, retirement accounts, and so on. They make $50,000 a year from their job, which is roughly $4,200 a month. After their living expenses and taxes, deductions, and so on, they have about $1,000 a month to spend however they wish, be it all into savings or spending it all, or anything in between. Now, don't get me wrong, everyone's situation is different. $50,000 a year may be fantastic for some, especially if they have their needs taken care of. Say that teenager or young adult lands a job for $50,000 a year, but still stays with their parents. Or maybe they join the military where their needs are being mostly taken care of. On the other hand, someone may be struggling with making $50,000 a year. And it just all depends. For the most part, forever, our hypothetical average Joe has around $1,000 to work with a month after expenses and savings and taxes and so on. Less than the $3,000 a month well-off scenario 1 individual, but definitely more than what the scenario 2 teenager young adult individual is working with. All three of these individuals can be irresponsible with their money, regardless of their income. On the other hand, these three individuals can also be smart with their money and be smart spenders as well. It doesn't matter how much money you have or what your income is. It shouldn't stop you from budgeting and spending wisely. Let me put all three individuals with all three of their money to use after expenses on the screen at one time. Now, why am I doing this? Reason 1 is to illustrate that there isn't a cookie cutter strategy that's perfect for everyone when it comes to budgeting, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth it to have a budget or learn how to budget. Everyone will have an ideal method that works for them at their current point of their life. If you don't have to worry about paying for your living situation or have no actual expenses for your needs, you should absolutely take that opportunity to save and not spend the majority of your income. Practice having to pay for expenses and pretend that you need to save this amount of money for a future car payment or rent or so on. Don't waste your opportunity to put your future self in a better situation and just spend your money haphazardly. You have it good right now. Set yourself up for success. Once you get older and are in a situation where you now have to pay for more needs, hopefully your previous self has set you up for success when you were young. But regardless, the saving almost your entire monthly paycheck or your income that a teenager or young adult may be able to do may not be viable anymore. You might have to spend the majority of your paycheck or income just for your needs, and you're able to only save a small percentage. And then by the time you retire and enjoy your 401k or retirement accounts, you may have little or no income. Although there are fantastic ways to make passive income, even when retired, but that's a video for another day. So you might just be living solely on savings and not saving at all, or at least very little. Obviously, you still need savings and money to continue your life, but the point of me stating that a budget is important is that even if you're at a point where you don't have to pay for expenses, you should still budget. That means getting in the habit of tracking your expenses, getting used to saving, and knowing what works for you. You should always know how much money you're spending in relation to how much income you have or how much money you have. No matter how scary it is to think of the future, if you don't set yourself up for success, eventually you'll have to grow up, and the alternative of having no source of income and no means to support yourself and not having your needs taken care of is a life that I wouldn't want to wish on anyone, and one that I've lived myself. And no matter where you are in life or which scenario closely matches you, it's important to have a budget. Know what your expenses are and what your income is, and set yourself a rule to limit your keyboard spending to XYZ percentage or dollar amount a month. This way, you end up face to face with yourself, and you can't blame anyone else for overspending. Going overboard with saving for a month for your want spending is nowhere near as detrimental than doing the opposite and going overboard with spending for a month. Oh no, I didn't make a purchase this month, but I saved $50. I feel so bad. You're not going to say that. Versus, oh no, I spent all my money on buying Keep stuff this month, and I didn't save a thing. It's pretty clear which is more detrimental when it comes to saving versus spending. Having actual numbers of and keeping track of your expenses can also make you understand that you're spending way too much on keyboard-related items. I've experienced this myself, but not keeping track of your expenses and just spending with thinking, as long as I don't go negative, is very dangerous. Visually seeing your expenses can make you more selective in what you buy and when you buy. Remember, there's always going to be another board, keycap set, or switch to try out. Don't feel like you have to spend each month. Be happy with what you have, and work towards getting to a scenario 3 or a scenario 1, where you can afford your wants in the hobby. It's very easy to just say, oh, I'm bad at saving, I've never had any money, or I've never had so much money before, so I spend all of my money instead of saving it all when I do get money. Don't continue to fool yourself and lie to yourself. Make the uncomfortable and difficult decision to save your money instead of giving into spending all your money just for that dopamine rush, and blame it on not having money, so I usually spend it all when I get it. In order to break a habit or change the cycle of unnecessary spending, you're going to have to do something different than what you've been doing up to this point. Don't stay stuck in the mud. Break free of the hold that buying things has on you. I know you can do it. This happened with my son. He never lived the life that I did or my wife did when we grew up extremely poor and saved up every penny. So, he routinely spent all of his monthly allowance or any money he obtained versus saving the majority of the money he got. When he finally got a job, he realized how foolish it was to just spend money when he didn't have a reliable source of income, even though my wife and I had repeatedly attempted to instill the value of saving. It can be difficult to pull your friend or your family member aside and let them know that they're hurting themselves financially due to their spending habits. But that's what makes a good friend or a good parent. Reach out from a place of love and don't be condescending, and let them know that you're telling them this because you care about them. Calculate your expenses, calculate your income, and come up with a better saving strategy that works for you, and adhere to that strategy. The more you save, the better off you'll be in the future. Remember, the keyboard hobby is not a need, it's a want. It's a luxury hobby, and one you should never spend all your money on, even if you can recoup some of it back in the future. Better not to put yourself in a hole in the first place. With this hobby, you're never going to regret saving more than you spend each month, but you may regret the opposite, spending more than you save each month. Do your current self and future self a favor and learn how to budget, and find a budgeting method that works for you. Start that saving now. And for those of you that already save, keep it up. Reason number 2 for bringing up these 3 scenarios is to illustrate how far money goes in the hobby. And regardless of which scenario is closest to you, you can still enjoy the hobby. Yes, there are old keyboards like OTDs that are thousands of dollars. Yes, there are artisans that go for $500,000 to $100,000 each. And yes, it's very easy to just buy Janes and unicorns on the aftermarket for thousands of dollars. But those are outliers. There are people who have numerous $500 to $1,000 plus keyboards and spend thousands of dollars every month on keyboard related items. But that's not the majority of us, nor is it the audience for whom this video is intended for. In the grand scheme of things, our hobby is relatively tame, and especially now, money can go a long way. This isn't 2019 when $150 didn't leave you with many keyboard options that sounded good, felt good, and looked good. 2024 is an unbelievable time in our hobby, and it's just going to get better. The competition in the $100 to $200 price range with keyboards is crazy, and a lot of keyboards in that price range absolutely defeat those in 2019 at the same price point when it comes to value. With everything becoming more mainstream and the hobby growing, your dollar goes further than it used to. The well-off Scenario 1 individual could theoretically stock up on GMK keycaps, thousands of switches, and numerous $1,000 keys, but generally speaking, they have it good in the hobby. Sooner or later, they'll eventually hit a point where they've bought everything that they've wanted, and with our hobby and how much money goes these days, it could very well come sooner than later. If you're interested in buying stuff only, this hobby may not be long-lasting for you, and you may grow bored. There's always going to be another thing to buy, but just buying things is not necessarily what makes our hobby so enjoyable. The teenager young adult Scenario 2 individual may need to save up longer to buy what they want, but their money can still go a long way. And by saving up, they may even end up loving their purchases more, as it gives more meaning to the purchase. If I was just gifted a car versus spending 2 years saving just to be able to buy one, you bet that purchase of a car is going to be more meaningful because I spent 2 years saving. The average Joe Scenario 3 individual may have the best of both worlds. While being able to comfortably buy the majority of things that they want, they also understand that saving and or sometimes passing on something in order to afford something else in the future isn't necessarily bad. Regardless of which scenario best fits you, the fact of the matter is that your money goes a long way nowadays for the most part. Keyboards have come down in price, competition in the sub $200 category is fierce, keycaps and switches are also seeing a similar movement, and we may possibly see them also being much more affordable in the future. I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy yourself with this hobby. I'm saying that there's a balance to spending, and if you are smart with your spending, your future self will thank you. Also, there's much more to the hobby than just buying things again and again. Enjoy what you have. To summarize tip 1, learn how to budget, which is tracking expenses and income, and set a budget, and stick with it. Your money goes a long way. Tip number 2, figuring out your preferences. So, you figured out your budget, and now you have a clear idea of how much you want to spend every month or every year when it comes to the keyboard hobby. Now you need to figure out your preferences. To begin, I wanted to bring up the idea of hype. Hype itself is not inherently bad. It's a part of our hobby like many others, and without being excited about a new board, keycap, or switch, could make for a very boring hobby. Just because something is hyped up doesn't make it automatically deceptive or bad. Yes, there are situations where hype is used to instill a feeling of missing out, and some things are exaggerated to make a product seem better than it usually is, but that's when being a smart consumer helps. Buying into the hype without doing your research and just buying things because others said so, or because they're rare, or you can flip them, does happen. But hype alone shouldn't be your reason for buying things. Again, this is just my opinion. You can do whatever you want with your money. I can't stop you. These are just my thoughts. To determine your preferences, ask yourself what part of the hobby, or parts, that you enjoy. Are you someone that enjoys trying switches, and the fun part of the hobby is buying a bunch of different switches, and you don't really care too much about buying boards or keycaps? Are you someone that likes to buy a bunch of different layouts of keyboards, but don't care about switches or keycaps? Are you someone that absolutely loves the art aspect of the hobby, and loves artisans, and the aesthetics of a keyboard, but don't really care much about the sound or feel of a keyboard or switch? Or a combination of everything. Figure out what you like, not what other people like. You can use other people's opinions and thoughts to determine your own preferences, but remember, it's you that's going to be enjoying your purchases, not anyone else. If someone states that this 60% layout board is the best board they've ever typed on, but you don't like 60%, or you don't know that if you like 60%, why would you buy it? Ideally, you should do the best you can to determine things without spending a lot of money right off the bat. Too often, we fall into the trap of buying the most expensive things without knowing if we like said thing or not, or wanting to get the best before figuring out if we really like that thing, only to realize that we either don't fully appreciate that item or even like that item. A few ways to determine your preferences without spending too much money are as follows. Sound tests. Yes, it can be difficult to determine what a board, keycap set, or switch sounds like based off of sound tests alone, but it's free. And if you find many videos covering the same board, keycap set, or switch, you can at least get some sort of average on what the sound may be like, even if it's not perfectly accurate to what you'll be hearing on your actual desk or in your setup. Testing things out in real life, such as meetups or having good friends. If you're able to actually try things with your own ears and hands without spending money, be it going to meetups and trying other people's things, or going to a friend's house and experiencing boards, keycaps, and switches. That way, it's much better than spending your own money when determining what you like and what your preferences are. Finally, reviews, both written and in video format. Yes, some reviews are biased, but learning to differentiate between marketing verbiage, personal opinion, and actual truth is very helpful. The more information you glean from multiple sources, the better. If I never had a 60%, and I don't know if I'd like one, I'm not going to go out and spend thousands of dollars on a unicorn on the aftermarket. If I've never played a guitar before, I'm not going to go out and buy a Stratocaster. If I've never boxed before, I'm not going to buy a pair of Grant boxing gloves. Does this mean a Bankrupt 60 or another 60% keyboard that's much cheaper than a unicorn will sound or feel the same as a unicorn? No. But the point is, don't buy something super expensive without knowing whether or not you like that layout or some other aspect of the board. Just because a unicorn is hyped doesn't mean that you should just go out and buy one without knowing if you'll like one or not. Do your research, and don't feel like you have to get the most expensive thing right off the bat. In the end, it's you that's spending money to buy these things. And it's you who can say that if you enjoy something or not anyone else. You can use other people's opinions to determine what you enjoy, but only you can truly know what you enjoy at the end of the day. Don't try and fool yourself. Let's go back to the unicorn example for 60%, because that was my actual experience. I didn't know if I would like 60% boards. Not only the layout, but the actual mounting style of a unicorn, which is a gummy O-ring. What I did next was I researched what boards had similar mounting styles, were 60%, and were similar to the unicorn. Weightless boards like the Bankrupt 60, weighted internal or external boards like the Seal 60, and so on. Understanding what sound tests sound like, and what it actually sounds like on my actual desk, with my actual configuration of switches, keycaps, and plate, I at least had a vague idea of what I might expect. I was fortunate enough to have a very good friend that had O-ring 60% boards that I was able to try out and figure out if I'd like them and if I'd be able to use that layout. Now, this may not be an option for you, or going to a meetup may not be an option, but the point I'm trying to make is that instead of buying a unicorn just because of hype or because someone said it's good, even if you'd never bought a 60% O or an O-ring mounted keyboard, it's not a smart purchasing decision. In the end, I ended up buying a Bankrupt 60, and that confirmed that I love 60% O-ring boards. If I had gone straight to spending $1,000 plus on the aftermarket to buy a unicorn, which I never have and never will, and even if I'm never lucky to win a unicorn raffle, I'm still not going to spend that much on the aftermarket for a unicorn, without any sort of research or trying cheaper alternatives, I might have still come to the realization that I love 60% O-ring boards, but that's a very large amount of money to put down without even realizing and making sure that I enjoy that type of board. Be smart with your purchases and determine your preferences before you go all out. This applies to switches and keycaps as well. There are thousands of different switches that chances are you may not just have one or two switches that you like, but you can use the same strategies of researching before you buy. And then once you buy, not go overboard when it comes to switches. Will a cheap switch imitate an expensive switch perfectly, even if all the same materials are used? Possibly not. But as long as you are informed about what you are about to purchase and do your research, you'll be much better off. And hey, maybe you're someone that actually enjoys trying new things and loves to buy hundreds of switches, as opposed to narrowing down your preferences to a few. This is also applicable to keycaps and keyboards and artisans as well. As long as you do so responsibly, keeping in mind what your budget is, you can still enjoy the hobby in that way. Remember, the point I'm trying to get across here is to create a budget. Understand how much money you're willing to allocate towards key-related purchases every month or every year, and stick to that budget. Once you find out your preferences, whether it be a specific style of board, layout, specific keycap manufacturer, specific style of switch, and so on, combining that with the budgeting mindset gives you the ability to spend responsibly. If I know that I love full nylon switches, there's nothing wrong with spending money on various different manufacturers' full nylon switches, as long as I do so responsibly. I know that I love full nylon and PC top nylon bottom switches, and those are my preferences. So personally, I'm not going to go out to buy full palm switches. Once you figure out what you enjoy in the hobby, you can focus more on saving for those things. Does that mean your preferences can't change? Not at all. Are you someone that enjoys trying all these various different kinds of switches? That's totally fine. It is fulfilling to realize what your preferences are for me, because I could truly enjoy the hobby once I got to that point. And you can feel a bit lost in the hobby when you're trying to learn what you enjoy. You may end up spending too much money in pursuit of finding your own preferences. But as long as you spend responsibly and have a budget and have some idea of what your preferences are, you're at a much better situation than if you just threw money around without knowing what you really like. When I joined the hobby in 2021, there was so much to learn, and I was completely lost. I ended up buying thousands of switches, dozens of cheap boards, and a bunch of clone keycaps, because at the time, I didn't know what clones were. If I had known how to determine preferences without spending money, and then slowly tried things out, I would have been a lot happier, and my wallet would have been in a much better place. Even though I did recoup some of those losses by putting those purchases on the mech market and other means of getting that money back. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that just because you buy 20 cheap boards for $50 each, you're being financially responsible. Will it hurt less if you spend $1,000 on 20 boards versus buying 20 $500 boards? Sure. Is there anything wrong with enjoying cheap boards as opposed to spending more than $100 on one or two boards? No, there's nothing wrong with that. The reason that buying a lot of cheap things can be a negative is that if you have an addictive personality and you continue to buy board after board and you can't stop justifying your purchases because they're cheap, it's not healthy behavior. Does that mean you should just buy one $500 board and be done with it? Absolutely not. What I'm saying is that there's a difference between being addicted to buying things versus spending responsibly. Some people realize their preferences after buying cheap boards. Some people realize it when they buy their first expensive board. Regardless of when you find your preference, as long as you follow your budget that you came up with and you don't exceed said budget and understand how to be responsible with your spending, you'll be in a much better spot than I was. You can become addicted to buying inexpensive things, and it can be just as detrimental as being addicted to buying expensive things. It can end up being that you carry on with your same addictive purchasing habits with expensive boards, buying dozens of expensive boards just as you bought dozens of inexpensive boards, without realizing your spending habits are unhealthy. If you set a budget and you know how much you want to spend a month, and you determine your preferences, you'll be in a much better financial situation than I was, and you'll probably be much more happier. To summarize tip 2, determine your preferences and what you enjoy in the hobby, and then marry that up with your budget to be able to have an understanding of what you want to buy and how much you want to spend, versus buying on impulse without knowing what you like or having a budget. Tip number 3, don't regret your decision to pass or save on something. You made it this far. Congratulations. You've learned how to budget and planned out how much every month or every year you want to spend on key-related items, and you figured out your preferences. You're pretty much good to go. But if you want to hear about the third and final tip, here it is. Don't regret your decision to pass or save on something. I touched upon this briefly during the beginning, but if you were to overdo one of the two, saving your money or spending your money, one has far less negative consequences than the other. Saving your money instead of spending it may leave you feel saddened at missing out on a project or an item, be it a group buy, pre-order, an in-stock item, or even something on the aftermarket. But it's gonna benefit you in the long term. At least for me, I've never thought, oh man, I wish I had bought XYZ instead of saving my money when it came to our keyboard hobby. For example, I loved my friend's Glare TKL, and while I would have been able to financially afford it when the extras were available for the in-stock sale, and even though one pops up every now and then on the aftermarket at a good price, I always decide not to buy one. Why? Is it because I don't think it's worth the price, even if it's a bit inflated on the aftermarket? Is it because I don't like it? Or is it because I don't think it sounds good or looks good? Absolutely not. It's such a fantastic looking and sounding board, especially the way that my friend configured his, which was with a full palm plate with Geon black linears, and something that I copied on my Glare 65 with a PP plate and the Geon black linears as well. And it's definitely worth the price. But $600 to $800 is still $600 to $800. I have no problem spending money on something that I deem worth it, but that's still a significant amount of money. I can do so much with that, be it for myself, for my wife, or for my family. So I sacrifice the dopamine rush and the happiness that I'm sure I'll have if I buy one, and I save that $600 to $800. It's not like I don't have other keys that make me equally as happy, and it's not like I can't be happy because of some other hobby or something else that happens in my life. I've never regretted not pulling the trigger on a Glare TKL because I'm happy with what I have. I know that money can be spent elsewhere, and I know that there will always be another Glare board, even a possible TKL in the future. If for some reason there would never be another chance to obtain a Glare TKL, for example, if all of them just disappeared from the world, I wouldn't regret saving the $600 to $800 and not getting a chance to buy it. There are boards that have made me, are making me, and will make me equally as happy. I encourage all of you to enjoy what you have, because a lot of times we always look towards the next thing, when something that you already have makes you happy. And we sometimes forget how fortunate we are to have said thing already in our possession. It fit my budget after saving for a few months in terms of keep spending. My wife would have no issue with me buying it. But why do I still pass on it after all this time? Is it the cost, being $600, $800? No. Even if I didn't pay that from my income, I could absolutely just sell a few things in my keyboard and keycap collection to fund the purchase. So why don't I do it? Honestly, and this is a really boring answer, and it may not make sense, but I like having money. I like having savings. I like having $600 to $800 on hand, even if I don't need it right away. Maybe it's because I've had a responsibility as a father and as a husband for quite some time. Maybe it's because my parents instilled in me the value of not necessarily loving money, but getting to a point where I'm comfortable with my finances, even if I don't have to spend it in the near future. For me, there's just something extremely satisfying about looking at a bank account or knowing that you have XYZ amount of dollars. Could I buy this or that and still have a good amount of money? Absolutely. But I just love saving to save. I know that even if I don't personally use it, the money I save from withholding luxury or want purchases, even if they are valid and well thought out, could either be used for my family or given to someone else. I get a great satisfaction from knowing I'm saving, and I'm setting either myself up for success in the future or my loved ones. Does this mean that you should do the same? Absolutely not. We enjoy different things, and we all have different goals in our lives. If you're saving for a couple months for that dream keyboard, and you finally get a chance to buy that dream keyboard, even if it's $1,000, There's nothing wrong with you going and buying it, but what I'm trying to say is that you should never feel bad for passing up on that keyboard purchase and just saving your money instead. Even if you can't see the benefit now, or in the future, I promise you it will be beneficial to have that money available. Let's face it, there will always be another keyboard, keycap set, or switch to buy that fits your preferences and that you like. You may miss out on a super rare OTD keyboard on the aftermarket, but chances are something else will come along. And even if it doesn't come along, you just saved yourself thousands of dollars that you could use for an equally fulfilling purchase or other use case that makes you equally, if not more, happier than buying that OTD. Pat yourself on the back. Does this mean that you shouldn't buy things that you want? Absolutely not. But remember, we're striving for balance. Even if I had the money to buy everything I ever wanted, I wouldn't ever do that. Does that mean that I believe in the saying of money can't buy happiness? No. What I'm saying is that you shouldn't feel bad about saving or passing up on a purchase. Don't ever regret setting you or someone else up for success in the future by saving. Of course, you can always buy things that you want with your budget that you've calculated. It's also totally okay to pass on something that you can buy, just for the sake of saving. Even if you don't know what you're saving for, your future self will thank you. There you have it. I appreciate you all for sticking with me until the end, and I hope you aren't all bored of me by now. Those are my 3 tips to avoid going bankrupt in our hobby. Again, I'm not perfect, and I practice these 3 tips daily, not just in the keyboard hobby, but in other hobbies in my life in general. So don't think I'm perfect. None of us are. But as long as we do our best to be financially smart and put ourselves and our future selves in a better situation than we might not have been in if we had given into impulse buying, then we can pat ourselves on the back. As much as we hype up and get excited for each other's purchases and builds, let's also do the same when people say they're saving for this or that, or say that they passed up on a purchase even though they could afford it. Let's do our part to celebrate and acknowledge when we ourselves save or make a smart financial decision, as well as others. We get so excited and pump others up when they share that first build, or are super excited because of something they did or bought, that we sometimes forget to do the same thing in situations where a person saves instead of buying, or makes a smart financial decision. Great job on saving instead of impulse buying. Wait to do your research and really sleep on your decision to purchase that board. You've been saving money for 3 months to afford XYZ? That's awesome. Things like that. Celebrate yourself and celebrate others when they make smart decisions. It may not be as sexy as congratulating someone for buying a Kohaku, but trust me, to acknowledge someone for being smart and saving or adhering to their budget is equally important as celebrating someone putting together a build that they love or buying a board that they've always wanted. Let's make saving and being smart spenders a habit. You'll be thankful that you've done so, and our future selves will thank us as well. Let me know in the comments about situations where you decide to save instead of spend, or when you saved up to buy that one thing and it was worth it. I love reading and hearing about when people spend responsibly, and I hope that when my next video comes out, I'll be talking to a bunch of people that have been practicing sensible spending. As always, thanks for watching. I really appreciate all of you, and until next time.